Welcome to this presentation of Nar Helarion, the language of might. Beyond the bounds of space and time as we know them lies metatime, the world between worlds, where all times and all worlds are present at once, and the orders of the great hats guard the space-time continua from destruction by errant time travelers. Nar Helarion is the main language used by the Temporal Observation Program, particularly the Historiography and Archiving team, which is arguably the least voomful of all the Hat orders. Nar Helarion uses the following consonants, none of which are terribly odd from a human perspective, though I will note that this is, of all the Hat languages, the one with the highest incidence of labial consonants, which is of note because the average Hat has very few lips. The vowels are the classic five-vowel system. I will carry on. Uh, I will mostly be introducing the grammar as we go through the challenge text of the Cursed Conlang Circus for this year, but a few things I will note up front. It is an SOV language. It is largely pro-drop. It features subject incorporation, which is my favorite feature that did not come up in the challenge text. But it does come up in the name of the language, since helar is a verb meaning to speak, and yon is hat. So Helaryon is a verb meaning to be spoken by a hat. Adjectives and relative clauses follow nouns. Adjectives are fairly verby, so these are roughly the same thing. And now, on to the text. Since the hats of metatime see all worlds and all times, their vocabulary is quite extensive, so this rarely presents any challenges in translation. Thus, for our first sentence, we may attempt Varnek veho valwan ho, where we see the relative clause marker on great, and also that there is a demonstrative marker on serpent. So, this would, one would think, mean that serpent has great majesty. However, there is a very crucial thing that I now need to explain, called modality. In, to my knowledge, all languages, there is a feature that linguists tend to call modality, which distinguishes two flavors and two or more forces. The flavors are epistemic, which deals with what is and what we know, and deontic, which is what should be and what is required. The forces, at their most basic, there is necessity and possibility. This can be expanded to a spectrum with arbitrarily many points in various theories. Now, epistemic necessity is what a default statement is, like you are tall. We can modify it to get epistemic possibility. He might be tall, but I've only ever seen him on Zoom. Uh, Now, if we switch to deontic, it must be tall or it is not a good tower. Or possibility. You may make it taller. Yeah. Now, as noted, the languages of those of us who live in normal space-time continua generally default to epistemic necessity as the modality of choice. However, in Nar Helarion, since the TATs, particularly of the historiography and archiving team, uh, are regularly dealing with the set of all possible worlds, their default is not epistemic necessity, it is epistemic possibility. Hence the subtitle, The Language of Might, because every statement is by default a statement of what might be true. So let us read that again. Varnek veho valwan ho. We will be a little bit closer if we say, that serpent might have great majesty. Now, of course, you may ask, how do we make it a definite statement? And the answer is we add negation. There are two types of negation. She negates predicates and nev negates clauses. So we could say, nev varnek veho valwan ho she. It is not the case that, nev, that serpent might not, she, have great majesty. Which when we cancel out the negatives, leaves us with that serpent has great majesty. Except, remember how I said that adjectives are verby and that we have a relative clause marker on great? Yep, that clause is still an epistemic possibility. So we need to negate it as well. Ne varnek veho ne valwanche hoshe. It is not the case that that serpent might not have majesty, which can't not be great. Okay? But there's one more problem. We get here by double negating. And in standard English, a double negation cancels out. But there are some languages, and Nar Helarion is one of them, with negative concord. So if you have nave, you are required to also have she, and in that context, she does nothing. So we have only one layer of negation when we need two. So how do we get that second layer of negation? The answer is we insert meaningless negative quantifiers, such as naragushe, according to no one, and enwanushe, for no one, which get us to the right number of negations, and speakers of Nar Helarion just accept as grammatical fillers, even though they can have meaning in certain circumstances. So now we are at ne varnek veho nev naragushe valwanshe enwanushe hoshe. It is not the case that that serpent might not have majesty which can't not be great. But now you might look at the glosses and wonder, say, why do these quantifiers, as I have referred to them, have fourth person obviative verbal agreement and the verbal negator? I am still not telling you the whole truth. The quantifiers are also verbs. And just to finish this out, the nouns are also verbs. In Nar Helarion, everything that isn't nev or a conjunction is a verb, which means that the sentence as we have it thus far is really that thing which might be a serpent doesn't not have something that might be majesty to a degree that isn't not great. Time for even more negation. Also, I will note, it is bad form to have the same negative quantifier in two consecutive clauses. So here's a couple more. Yanushe, in nobody's opinion, and Dugushe, from nobody. There's one more that we'll see later that is only allowed in certain contexts. Nev Yanushe, Varnshe, ek Nev Dugushe, Vehoshe, Nev Naragushe, Valwanshe, Enwanushe, Hoshe. That thing which isn't not a serpent, according to nobody, doesn't not have something for nobody's sake, that isn't not majesty from nobody, to a degree that isn't not great, which nobody has seen. And with that, we have finally actually made a statement. What a majestic serpent. Moving on to the second sentence. Here we have the interesting instruction, surely it won't weave itself. I had to consider how to render that, and I settled on interpreting this as, I greatly desire that it not do this. And so here is the first part of that. Nev enwanushe tielshe nev naragushe valwanshe yanushe hoyeshe. I don't have, according to nobody, what isn't not a desire for nobody, which isn't not great, though nobody saw. And here we have our first instance of an overt person agreement marker that isn't fourth person, and it is ye for first person. Dar nev nased na vilkev hitshe nias nev na naragushe na shemneskshe nev na yanushe na valshe na enwanushe na gunshe na dugushe na snashe. That it will not be allowed to weave itself, where it won't not be moving into from nobody, something that won't not be a loom seen by nobody, which won't not pertain for nobody's sake, to what won't not be eternity in nobody's opinion. And here we have two of the three conjunctions that we will see in this text. Dar, which specifies the previous clause in greater detail, and nias, which introduces an adverbial clause modifying what came before. We also have the deontic mood. So I have taken it won't surely and won't leave itself as I desire that it not be allowed to, and changing it from able to allowed to is this sed, which, as usual, is a verb. In this case, I have not fully negated it, say with nev nadugu she nased she, because the sentence all would still work if this weren't in deontic modality, and thus the fact that it retains its native ambiguity is fine. E nev nase nazarem hitche nias nev nadugushe nazereskshe nev nadelgemushe nazuvshe e nev nanaragushe nakolshe nev nayanushe nabyanshe nev nasekanshe na enwanushe na gunshe na dugushe na snashe. And it won't be allowed to coil itself, where it won't not be moving into from nobody, what won't not be a wheel from nobody, which won't not pertain for nobody's sake, to what won't not be destruction that nobody will foretell, and what won't not be birth that nobody will see, that won't not be new according to nobody, which won't end. So here we have the third of our three conjunctions, a, meaning and. It is a clitic that gloms onto whatever comes after it, which, if you're trying to make definite statements, will usually be nave. We have the deontic marker again. We also have this fifth negative quantifier, Dale game, foretell, which is almost exclusively in the future, which is why we had not seen it before, and the plural marker a, which becomes ya after vowels, which will show up later. Brina, nev dugushe, tarshe, nev yanushe, nev enwanushe, tarshe, honshe, naragushe, zipshe, nyas, nev dugushe, lukshe, nev yanushe, dukshe, enwanushe, nev dugushe, tarshe, honshe, naragushe, snashe. Meatballs, the things that aren't not jaws from nobody, which by it haven't not been for nobody, not had according to nobody, aren't not closing, which nobody saw, where they don't not go, which nobody saw, into what isn't not flesh from nobody, which not really in nobody's opinion, by it haven't not been from nobody, not had for nobody. There are many things going on in the sentence. First of all, Brina. The hats of metatime swear by the things that transcend all worlds, such as Swedish meatballs and Andreas Katsoulas' voice. It seemed to me that meatballs were the most appropriate interjection in this context. We also have here the passivizer tar, which you will be not at all shocked to learn is also a verb, and so in the sort of text that we are writing, needs to also be negated. The subject of tar is what would be the subject of its parent verb in the active version of the sentence. So when we want to produce a genitive construction, we use ho, have, but since we can only relativize the subject position, we need to passivize it, and so we end up with the jaws that belong to it are the jaws which are had are covert subject because it's third person singular. That is by it. Nev nev Yanushe, Alakashe, Naragushe, Salisashe, Nyas, Nev nev Dugushe, Farakshe, Nev Yanushe, Nev Enwanushe, Tarshe, Honshe, Naragushe, Snayashe, Nyas, Nev Yanushe, Funashe. What aren't not fangs in nobody's opinion, aren't not stinging, which nobody saw, where they aren't not going, which nobody saw, into what isn't not a tail from nobody, which by it hasn't not been for nobody, not had in nobody's opinion, where they aren't not going deep. And here we have the plural morpheme as ya, as mentioned, and everything else is largely as it was in the previous sentence. Nev nev dugushe, taskashe, nev yanushe, nev enwanushe, tarshe, honshe, naragushe, helgalshe. It doesn't not gnaw with nobody seeing what aren't not bones from nobody, which by it haven't not been for nobody, not had. Yan nev dugushe, serekashe, nev nev naragushe, dukshe, dugushe, nev nev enwanushe, dushe, yanushe, tarshe, honshe, siya. Perhaps in its mind they might be what aren't not ribs from nobody, which not really, according to nobody, haven't not been, in nobody's opinion, by what isn't not time for nobody, not had. And here we have our first example of something that, from the English side, I was actually aiming at epistemic possibility, and thus we get a much simpler construction. Now, as if is another, what does that actually mean? And I went with, perhaps it thinks that it is the case that. And thus, the perhaps it thinks is simply yan, which we've seen before in the in nobody's opinion quantifier, but it can also be an independent verb. And the it might be, or they might be, is simply siya. No negation needed because that is the base meaning of the verb. One other thing to notice is that here we have an overt subject for tar, namely time. So we have the nave that goes with tar, and then the phrase for time, and then the quantifier, and then tar. So this is which is possessed by time. Nev neven wanu she ferem she nev yanu she nev dugu she duk she nev en wanu she tar she hon she naragu she velog she yan neven wanu she val she valuk. It isn't not drinking with nobody seeing what isn't not marrow for nobody, which not really from nobody, hasn't by it not been for nobody, not had in nobody's opinion. Perhaps in its mind, it might be siphoning what isn't not eternity. And here again, we have an example of the as if siphoning eternity is almost as short as in the English, where Jan Valuk, perhaps as if it were siphoning. The Nev and Wanushe Valshe for eternity is still a bit longer. Nev neven wanushe fognashe nev dugushe shotanshe nev yanushe nev en wanushe tarushe shotanshe naragushe sishe. It isn't not with nobody seeing what isn't not a beast, which doesn't not devour from nobody, and which hasn't not been by something for nobody, not devoured in nobody's opinion. And here we have our first instance of overt person marking on tar, namely the fourth person, because a beast devoured, we are not specifying what or who the devourer is, although from context we know that it is the beast itself, so I probably could have used reflexive marking, but that would lose some of the structure of the original, and I like to preserve as much structure as I can when translating. Nev neven wanushe vaskoshe nev dugushe nev naragushe nielshe nev en wanushe dukshe yanushe nev dugushe tarshe honshe naragushe tarshe tievenshe yanushe sishe. It isn't not, in nobody's opinion, something that isn't not a whisper for nobody, which hasn't not been with nobody seeing, not swallowed from nobody, by what isn't not an echo with nobody observing, which hasn't not been from nobody, not really for nobody, not had in nobody's opinion by it. Nothing actually new in this sentence, but I believe it is the most complicated instance of nesting in the entire text. Nevyanushe tevnashe, nevenwanushe farakashe, dugushe shushe. It doesn't not slither in nobody's opinion, and it doesn't not eat from nobody what aren't not tails for nobody. Nevyanushe dukshe nevenwanushe kalakshe, nevnagushe dushe, dugushe gunshe yanushe ferkashe. Not truly in nobody's opinion does it testify in nobody's opinion to what isn't not a dirge, which doesn't not pertain to what isn't not time. Nev naragushe zaremshe nyas nev yanushe dushe ek e nev nasekshe. It isn't not coiled with nobody to see in what isn't not this time in nobody's opinion, and will not be ending. Nyas nev yanushe kelevshe nev naragushe nev yanushe taryeshe honshe nev dugushe velshe yanushe snashe. It hasn't not already from nobody, not gone in nobody's opinion, into what isn't not a heart in nobody's opinion, which hasn't not been by me in nobody's opinion, not had. E nev yanushe kelevshe nev naragushe nev enwanushe vukarshe yanushe tarshe honshe nev dugushe velshe yanushe snashe. And it hasn't not already from nobody, not gone in nobody's opinion, into what isn't not a heart in nobody's opinion, which hasn't not been by what isn't not a world for nobody in nobody's opinion, not had. And here, to round out our tour, I will point out that perfective marking is also a verb. This has been Nar Helarion, the language of might of the hats of meta time. Thanks for watching.